The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 10th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Now as Jesus and his disciples went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to Jesus and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. The Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. But with Martha and Mary here, they're sandwiched between these stories. And I think what's important is to, if you were here last week, the story that comes before is the story of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus says, go and do stuff. The story before he says, be still and listen, says, get out there and do things. The next story that happens at the start of chapter 11 is Jesus' disciples say to him, hey, teach us how to pray. So he lays down the Lord's Prayer. Not so much a prayer, but a way to pray. A way to pray. Which is pretty action-based. Full of things like forgiving, bread making, action. The Lord's Prayer is full of action. And here's my struggle with this story, and I don't know if it's your struggle, but I think sometimes I come across stories like this in the scriptures, and I know it well, and I've heard people talk about it, but I sometimes just sort of walk away from it like, well, yeah, I know that, right? That story of Martha and Mary. You guys might leave today and you'd be like, oh, we had a guest pastor, this jumpy guy, the shoe guy from the street, that homeless guy. And you may say, oh, that was Martha and Mary. I've heard it 1,000 times. Next. And I think sometimes we brush against these scriptures and our answer is to it, next, got it. Just choose one or the other. Jesus seems cool with doing things, but he also seems cool with sitting. And it doesn't really sometimes affect us or change us. And I always think the goal of faith is transformation. I'm one who believes the goal of faith is transformation, both for ourselves and for the world around us. And I believe, even in the midst of this story, there's transformation happening by the push that Jesus puts onto our lives. Because this wasn't just a thing that happened, it's a thing that's in the scriptures. That it's only in the Gospel of Luke. But Luke was all about the power of women, the necessity of the poor, the connection one-on-one. Jesus is always making connection one-on-one in the Gospel of Luke. And he pushes both of these gals to something new and fresh. So for Martha, in her neediness and whininess, which seems really justified to me, right? Maybe she's in there cooking vegetarian food and real food, right? I don't know. She's taking one for the team. And, for her, he just says, hey, you're distracted. Martha, you're distracted. How many things distract us from paying attention to what God's up to in the world? So many things. Sometimes I go whole moments without thinking about God. There's so many things going on in the world, right? That's why Orthodox Jews are cool. They've got all these things to remind them of their faith. Little rubrics that might seem silly to the outside world. But for them, it's that place of constant focus on God's presence in our lives. And so for Martha, Jesus just says, hey, you're distracted. Thinking about it in my life this week, like, what am I distracted by? What am I distracted by? What are the things that not just get me not to focus on the things that God might have me focus on, but get me focused on the wrong things? Sometimes focus just on myself, my own neediness. And he says to Martha that Mary, who's sitting at his feet just listening, doing nothing, breaking all the girl rules at the time. She should have been in there hustling in the kitchen. These guys have little houses. It makes it sound like there's thousands of people in the home. I mean, it could have been 3 or 4 people. Maybe it's, just Peter, James, and John in there or something. I don't know. But Mary just sitting, being still. He says Mary made the better choice. And what was her choice? Just sitting and listening. I've sometimes had people into my home, and I'm a really good cook. I'm pretty good. I can lay out a great meal. I can set a really awesome table. I can knock your socks off with a cocktail experience. It's extraordinaire. I can light stuff on fire. And there are times, though, over the years, and I've gotten better at this. I used to be more of I would say, an entertainer. But what I've learned is that hospitality is where it's at. Versus just laying out a great meal, where sometimes people would leave my home and we might have many people over to the house. People would say, wow, that was a super great night. But at the end of the night, I'm like, man, I was just hustling the whole night, right? Like maybe the better choice would have been to just sit and be still. Sit and be still. And for Mary, she gets the presence of Jesus because of her stillness. And Jesus says sometimes it's better to be still, sit, and listen. What are the places in your life where you have rhythms and practices of being still and listening? Maybe that's from a morning walk, a little gentle reading, the music that you might listen to, paying attention to the world around you. So often when we're doing the busy things of life, things get done, but there's no reflection in the midst of it. And I think that's what Jesus is up to here. He's just encouraging Martha to say, sometimes we can just relax a little bit. You don't have to always be fussing and doing the things. It's okay to be still. If you're a fusser, maybe you need to give yourself permission to be a little bit still, right? Grace yourself with something greater, right? I'm super glad that your worship was at 10 o'clock today because I made it to the gym this morning. So I was at the gym at 7:30 working out with Kara, and for me, those are things where I slow down my life a little bit. I sort of block out the other distractions, right? I'm literally rebuilding our Holy Kicks website right now because my current website is what we started with, and it just doesn't reflect who we are. And it's super distracting, though, because it's really overwhelming. It's a massive amount of work, right? And I find that sometimes when we block out, no matter what that quiet feels like for you, so for me, that's often exercise and that place of where we literally shut down the world, got no things else than to just pay attention to the moment. And those are times that sometimes we can fill that space with God. You don't have to just be like this, I mean, it's whatever the non-distraction is for you. And give yourself permission for that. Maybe it's to read a little bit more. Maybe it's to just sit and be still. Maybe it's to just change up your natural rhythms of your life so you can hear God in a fresh way. For some of you, maybe you need to take on a new discipline. If you've been doing the same thing over and over and it's not yielding any fruit or transformation, maybe mix it up. And Jesus is so cool about always getting us to mix it up. What do you need mixed up in your life that might give you something that sticks and stirs a little bit with you? Let me just give you a little challenge. If you just show up to church, You've been doing it for 100 years. I'm coming up on 59. I think I'm over the hump by now, right? I'm coming up on 59. I've been kind of a church rat most of my life. I always say I'm trying to outrun it, but I never seem I can, right? I'm like, one of my favorite scenes in any movie is an officer and a gentleman. You guys remember Richard Gere? If anything happens to Kara, I hope Richard Gere comes and carries me away, like Deborah Winger at the end of that movie, right? If you remember that. But he's got this great line where he wants to quit the Naval Academy, and where his drill sergeant is yelling at him. He says, are you going to quit? Are you going to quit? He says, I've got nowhere to go. I've got nowhere to go. And sometimes when we feel like we got nowhere to go, we're just doing the same old things. But do you just sometimes just show up at church because that's what you do? I mean, maybe you need to mix up. I mean, that's part of the routine at St. Mark's, isn't it? Yeah. Maybe you need to mix up your routine a little bit, right? Maybe one Sunday blow off church and do something different. Maybe you go serve somebody. Maybe take the most quietest walk you ever had. Maybe simply go walk around your block and pray for your neighbors. Right? Sometimes just mixing up the routine, sometimes choosing the better thing can get us just to think, feel, and start to become different. And that's really what Jesus is looking for. This is one of those stories that becomes so familiar to us, we can literally hear it and we just say, next. But what might God be speaking to each of us individually to make the choice that actually reflects the kingdom of God in our lives? What's cool about this story, there's no, like Lutheran pastors, every one of us should stop preaching, I'm sure of it. Lutheran pastors are trained to preach in this particular way. The end of a sermon, you're supposed to lay down the gospel. They fire you if you don't. And the gospel sounds like that. I'm such a good preacher. I'm not going to finish this way, but let me tell you how it should finish, okay? This is the sort of dreaded, I would say, BS that goes at the end of this. So Martha and Mary, boys and girls, right? Transformed because of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The grace of God poured out on our lives. We can become one who is not distracted. And may the Lord Almighty bless you and keep you. Like that's a finish of a good Lutheran sermon, right? Like, I don't know about Martha and Mary, but the death and resurrection of Jesus somehow just transformed me, right? What's cool about this story is you don't need any of that. And I'm pro-death and resurrection, believe me. It's about all I believe in anymore. I'm telling you, what's cool about this is Jesus just sort of lays it on these girls to sit with him and think about who and what they are. And so I just want to finish with that simple word for you. Where might be the places in your life you could ease up on some of the distraction? Be intentional about it. What might be the better choice just this week alone? Just find yourself stopping in your tracks in the midst of the distraction. In the midst of the distraction. Just to redirect what God might have for you. And sometimes what God might have for you is sort of what you want to have for you. It's okay. And where might be the other places that you do just need to sit and be still and listen to the stirrings of what God is up to in just the most gentlest of ways. And just simply give yourself complete permission to be in that place. It really just might be that simple. And so may the death and resurrection of our Lord Jesus. I just love simple stories like this. No need to pick a side. Just always choose God's great gift of care for us. Pay attention to the distraction. Give yourself permission.